The night begins without urgency. No sudden sound. No sharp edge. Just a slow, patient dark settling over a medieval town that has learned, over centuries, how to sleep. Close your eyes for a moment, if you wish. Not because you must, but because nothing here requires effort. Imagine narrow streets softened by time, their surfaces uneven and darkened by countless evenings like this one. The stones still hold a little warmth from the day, and the air carries the faint, earthy scent of damp wood and old mortar. Timber-framed houses lean gently toward one another, as if sharing secrets too quiet for daylight. Their upper floors stretch out over the lanes, creating long ribbons of shadow beneath. Somewhere far off, a church bell tolls. Not loud, not commanding, just present. Its sound rolls slowly through the town, dissolving into the night like a breath released. This is not a story meant to hurry you anywhere. It does not demand your attention. It only invites your presence. Long ago, nights like this were common. The world moved at a pace that followed the moon more closely than the clock. When darkness came, it was not resisted. It was accepted, even welcomed, as a necessary pause in the rhythm of life. Inside one of the houses along these streets, a single candle burns. Its flame wavers gently, casting soft, amber light against thick stone walls. The room is small, simple, and quiet. A wooden bed rests in the corner, layered with coarse blankets and linen worn thin by years of use. There is no luxury here, but there is familiarity, and in that familiarity, a sense of calm. People of this time did not rush into sleep. They eased into it. They listened. They waited. Outside, the bell fades, replaced by the subtle sounds of the town at rest. The creak of wood cooling in the night air. The distant murmur of voices winding down. The soft footfall of someone returning home before darkness deepens. There is something comforting about knowing that, in this moment, nothing is expected of you. Before we drift deeper into tonight's gentle journey, remember to subscribe to Tedious History for Sleep. Here, you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. Your presence adds warmth to this quiet corner of the night. Now, allow your thoughts to slow, just a little. Medieval nights were shaped by silence and ritual. Time was not measured in minutes, but in moments, by the tolling of bells, by the dimming of candles, by the steady return of darkness. Life followed patterns set by seasons and faith, by planting and harvest, by fasting and feasting. The night belonged to rest, reflection, and the quiet companionship of shared space. In the hush of a stone-walled room, two people might lie side by side, not speaking. Words were not always needed. The nearness of another human presence was enough an anchor against the vastness of the dark. Even solitude, when it came, was not empty. It was filled with memory, prayer, and the gentle weight of routine. Outside, the cathedral stands watch, its great silhouette rising against the starlit sky. During the day, it governs the town with sound and structure. At night, it becomes something else entirely, a still, protective presence. Its walls seem to absorb the worries of the day, holding them until morning. The air cools gradually. Breath becomes slower, deeper. And in this slowing, the body remembers something ancient, how to rest without resistance. Medieval life is often imagined as harsh and unyielding, but beneath the rules and rituals was a deep understanding of rhythm. People knew when to work, when to wait, and when to let go. They understood that the body could not always be commanded, it had to be listened to. Within these walls, there were unspoken thoughts, longings that had no names, feelings that lived quietly beneath the surface of daily life. They were not dramatic. They did not demand expression. They simply existed like the steady flame of the candle, burning without spectacle. History, when told, softly reveals not grand events, but small human moments. The way someone folded a blanket at the end of the day, the way a window was left slightly open to let in night air, the way silence settled between breaths. And perhaps that is where true understanding lives, not in what was declared, but in what was carried quietly. If you have ever lain awake at night, listening to the world slow down around you, you are not far from this place. The distance between centuries narrows in moments like these. Time becomes less of a line and more of a circle, returning us to the same needs, the same comforts. Somewhere in the distance, another bell sounds so faint it might be imagined. Or perhaps it is simply the echo of memory, carried forward through stone and story. This is where our journey begins. Not with urgency, not with revelation, but with a single candle, a quiet room, and a night that asks nothing of you except to remain. As the flame steadies and the town drifts further into rest, a subtle curiosity stirs, not sharp, not demanding. Just a gentle wondering about the lives that unfolded here, beneath these same stars guided by rules they did not choose but learned to live within. And in that wondering, the story slowly opens. The candle does not burn forever. It was never meant to. Its flame leans slightly, responding to currents of air too gentle to feel, yet real enough to shape the night. Shadows stretch and retreat along the stone walls, slow and patient, like thoughts that drift without urgency. In the medieval world, order was everywhere, not loud, not enforced in every moment, but present, like an invisible architecture holding life in place. It was heard in the bells that marked the hours, felt in the seasons that returned without fail, and seen in the rituals repeated so often they became second nature. Time itself moved differently here. It did not rush. It did not press. It waited. Days unfolded according to light and labor. Nights belonged to rest, reflection, and quiet restraint. Even desire, that most human of impulses, learned to move slowly, wrapped in silence and patience. Not because it vanished, but because it was folded gently into the structure of life. Imagine stepping outside again, into the cool night air. The streets are nearly empty now. A door closes softly somewhere. A cat slips through the shadows, its presence barely a ripple in the dark. The town feels held, as if cradled by the surrounding fields and forests beyond its walls. Above, the sky opens wide. Stars scatter across the darkness, unhurried, constant. Medieval people looked at this same sky without knowing its vastness, yet sensing its weight. They saw patterns, stories, guidance, but also comfort. The heavens were steady, unchanging in a world that could feel fragile. Inside the cathedral, everything is still. During the day, it is filled with sound, voices, footsteps, echoes of prayer. At night, it rests. The stone absorbs silence. Candles burn low at the altar, their light softening the vastness of the space. Here, rules were spoken clearly, but they were also felt quietly, woven into daily life through repetition rather than force. Life was guided more by rhythm than by instruction. Fasting days followed feast days. Periods of restraint gave way to moments of release. Even the body learned these rhythms, responding to expectation and habit as much as to feeling. In homes like the one we glimpsed earlier, intimacy was not a spectacle. It was private, restrained, often unspoken. Two people might share a bed without sharing words. Touch, when it happened, was careful. Silence carried as much meaning as action. And yet, beneath that stillness, there was life. The human body does not disappear simply because it is not discussed. It adapts. It waits. It listens. History sometimes presents the medieval world as one of strict rules and heavy judgment. But when we look more closely, especially at night, we see something else, a quiet negotiation between order and feeling. People learned how to live inside boundaries without losing themselves entirely. There were books, small, practical texts, that tried to map this inner terrain, not to explore it deeply, but to manage it. They listed behaviors, cautions, permissions. Not out of fascination, but out of concern, these were not books of passion. They were books of worry. They reveal something tender in their restraint. The details matter less than the intention, a desire to create safety in a world that felt uncertain. Bodies were fragile. Life was unpredictable. Control, Even symbolic control offered comfort. Outside, the night deepens. The bell does not ring now. It rests, like everything else. Time stretches, wide and forgiving. There is no sense of hurry, only continuation. If you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of wind brushing against stone, or leaves shifting beyond the walls. These sounds are small, repetitive, steady. They ask nothing of the mind. They simply exist. This is how nights healed people then, and how they still can, by offering a space where nothing needs to be decided. As you rest here, following the slow drift of the story, you may notice your own breathing settling. Perhaps your shoulders soften. Perhaps thoughts arrive more slowly or not at all. You are not alone in this experience. Across centuries, countless others have lain awake in similar quiet, sensing the weight of rules, expectations, and unspoken feelings, and then, eventually, letting them go for the night. The medieval world did not encourage constant introspection. Feelings were not endlessly analyzed. They were lived with, carried gently, and often set aside until morning. There is wisdom in that simplicity. Not every thought needs resolution. Not every feeling needs explanation. Some things can rest, just as they are. The candle's flame flickers again, smaller now. Wax pools at its base, slow and deliberate. Nothing is wasted. Everything transforms. In this quiet, the story continues to unfold, not toward drama, but toward understanding. Not toward conflict, but toward acceptance. Soon, we will follow the subtle threads of daily life more closely. We will notice the small signs people use to communicate without speaking. The ways meaning traveled quietly through fabric, gesture, and habit. But for now, the night holds us. Let the stillness linger. Let the past breathe softly around you. There is no need to follow every word. The story knows the way. The night continues its slow unfolding, almost imperceptible, like a long breath taken by the world itself. If you linger here long enough, you begin to notice the quiet language of medieval life. A language made not of words, but of gestures, textures, and small deliberate choices. In a time when so much remained unspoken, meaning learned how to travel softly. Clothing, for instance, was never just clothing. A cloak drawn a little closer against the cold did more than keep warmth. It suggested reserve, modesty, or fatigue at the end of a long day. A scarf tied carefully, its fabric smoothed again and again by familiar hands, spoke of habit and care. Colors mattered too, not loudly, not dramatically, but as subtle signals shaped by custom and availability. Most people owned few garments. What they wore was chosen with intention, even if unconsciously. Over time, these choices formed a quiet vocabulary that everyone understood, even if no one ever explained it. In the low light of evening, these details softened. Colors faded into shadow. Textures became more important than hue, the roughness of wool, the smooth wear of linen against skin. Touch replaced sight as the primary sense, guiding people through the dark. Homes were close, walls thick, spaces shared. Privacy was rare, but intimacy existed in other forms. A glance held a moment longer than necessary. A hand rested briefly on another's sleeve. These were not dramatic acts. They were acknowledgments of presence, of connection, of shared existence. There is a gentleness and restraint that history does not always record. Many feelings lived quietly between people. They did not need expression to be real. They were carried like stones in a pocket, felt often, named rarely. As the night deepened, the boundaries of the day loosened. Work was finished. Tools were set aside. The body, accustomed to physical labor, welcomed stillness. Muscles softened. Thoughts slowed. In this space between waking and sleep, memory became more vivid. People remembered not in lists or timelines, but in sensations. The smell of bread cooling in the morning air. The sound of rain against thatched roofs. The weight of another person beside them in the dark. These memories did not demand attention. They surfaced gently, like reflections on still water. There were beliefs too, quiet ones, carried more by tradition than conviction. charms sewn into clothing, herbs hung near doorways. Simple acts repeated not because they were proven, but because they were familiar. In a world where control was limited, familiarity was comfort. These practices were not dramatic. They were not desperate. They were small gestures of reassurance, ways of saying, I am doing what those before me did. I belong to this rhythm. Even fear, when it came, was muted by routine. The unknown was not confronted head-on. It was softened, edged around, absorbed into daily life until it lost some of its sharpness. Silence helped with this. Silence allowed fear to pass through without growing. Listen now to the absence of sound. Not complete silence, never that, but a layered quiet. The distant call of a night bird, the faint rustle of leaves, the almost imperceptible creak of wood settling as temperatures shift. These sounds repeat without variation, creating a gentle pattern the mind can rest within. If you have ever found comfort in repetition, you understand this instinctively. The medieval night was full of repetition. Each night resembled the one before. And in that sameness there was safety. Inside the shared bed, bodies found positions that balanced closeness and space. There was no urgency to define what this closeness meant. It was enough that it existed. Breath synchronized. Warmth exchanged. Silence held everything else. The world beyond the walls felt far away now. Fields lay dark and still. Roads disappeared into shadow. Whatever worries belonged to daylight were temporarily suspended. Night was a pause, a mercy extended to all, regardless of station or belief. And perhaps this is what draws us back to these stories now. Not the rules, not the structures, but the pauses. Moments when life allowed itself to simply be. As you drift further into this story, notice how little effort it asks of you. There is no puzzle to solve, no tension to resolve. Only a gentle awareness of time passing slowly, kindly. History, when approached this way, becomes less about learning and more about remembering that humans have always needed rest, connection, and quiet reassurance. The candle's flame finally trembles, then steadies again. It is lower now, casting longer shadows. The room feels smaller, more enclosed, more intimate. This is where many nights ended, not with resolution, but with surrender. Surrender to sleep, surrender to not knowing, surrender to the comfort of being held by routine and darkness. Soon, we will turn toward a deeper understanding of how societies tried to make sense of these unspoken human needs. How systems and structures arose not from cruelty, but from a longing for order in a fragile world. But for now, remain here. Let the silence stretch. Let the past breathe beside you. Nothing else is required. As the night stretches onward, there is a gentle turning inward. Not dramatic. Not urgent but steady, like a river bending around stone. In the medieval world, much of life unfolded without written record. Feelings were lived, not documented. Daily routines repeated themselves until they became invisible. And yet quietly, there existed small books that tried to capture what could not be spoken aloud. They were modest volumes, practical in tone, often worn from use. These were not books meant for storytelling or beauty. They were books of concern. They attempted to give shape to unease. Rather than exploring the richness of human experience, they reduced it into categories, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of disorder, fear of the unseen. Fear that something deeply human might escape the structures holding the world together. These texts did not linger on description. They avoided imagery. They spoke in measured phrases, careful language, restrained judgments. Their goal was not fascination, but containment. And yet, in their restraint, something quietly human emerges. They reveal a world deeply aware of the body, aware not through celebration, but through watchfulness. The body was something to be guided, managed, protected from excess. It was seen as both fragile and powerful, capable of sustaining life, but also of unsettling order. This awareness did not live loudly in daily life. Most people did not spend their days thinking about rules or prohibitions. They worked, rested, ate, slept. But beneath that simplicity ran a current of quiet attention, a sense that certain parts of life required care, caution, and patience. Much like fire, fire warmed homes, cooked food, lit the night, but it could also destroy everything. So it was watched closely, managed carefully, never trusted completely. Human feeling was treated the same way. As the candle burns lower in the room, its flame steady but subdued, it mirrors this approach perfectly. It gives light without excess. It warms without overwhelming. It exists within limits, and in doing so, it remains safe. People learned to live like this, within bounds that softened fear. The night helped. In darkness, there was no need to perform, no audience to impress, no rules to actively enforce. Bodies rested, minds wandered gently, thoughts loosened their grip. Even concern slept. If you listen closely, you may notice how quiet the mind becomes when it is no longer asked to decide anything. This is the space medieval nights offered, a temporary release from responsibility. The books rested on shelves. The rules waited for morning. For now, there was only breathing, warmth, and the slow passage of time. History often highlights control and authority, but rarely pauses to notice the mercy of routine. Structure gave people a way to move through life without constant fear. It allowed them to place worries somewhere outside themselves, into books, rituals, and systems, so that at night they could rest. There is something deeply kind in that impulse. To say you do not have to carry this alone. As the room grows darker, the candle's light softens everything it touches, edges blur, details fade. What remains is shape, warmth, presence. This is how concern dissolves, not through confrontation, but through quiet. The medieval world was not endlessly tense. It was filled with long stretches of calm, punctuated by necessity. Most days were ordinary. Most nights were gentle. Life moved forward without constant reflection. And perhaps this is why these stories can still soothe us now. They remind us that we do not always need to analyze ourselves. That rest is not earned through understanding, but through permission. You may notice your own thoughts becoming simpler as you follow this rhythm. Less narrative, less questioning, more sensation, more stillness. That is not accidental. The story is guiding you not toward knowledge, but toward ease. Soon, we will step back even further, away from texts and structures, and return to the lived experience of people who knew nothing of historical analysis, only the feeling of night settling over their lives. We will notice how nature itself participated in this calming, how seasons, plants, and small beliefs offered reassurance without explanation. But for now, let the concerns of another age remain where they belong. Closed, shelved, resting. The candle flickers once more, then steadies again, as if satisfied with its place in the world. Nothing presses, nothing calls. The night holds everything. Stay here a moment longer. There's no need to move yet. The night breathes differently now. It is deeper, softer, more settled, as if the world has fully accepted rest and no longer resists it. The candle's flame has grown smaller, its light gentler, casting a warm halo that barely reaches the corners of the room. Beyond the walls, the land sleeps too. Fields lie dark and still, their furrows invisible beneath the sky. Trees stand in quiet companionship, their branches barely stirring. Somewhere, far beyond the town, water moves, a river or stream continuing its patient journey, unchanged by night or day. In the medieval world, nature was not something separate from human life. It was not observed from a distance. It was lived with, depended upon, trusted, even when it could not be understood. People knew the seasons intimately. They felt them in their bodies long before calendars marked their passing. Cold settled into joints. Warmth loosened muscles. Light changed moods. Darkness brought introspection. The year was not divided into months so much as into feelings. And with each season came its own quiet rituals. Herbs gathered at certain times. Plants dried and stored, not with urgency, but with care. These were not acts of desperation. They were gestures of continuity, ways of aligning oneself with the rhythms that had always existed. A sprig hung near a bed, a bundle tied above a doorway. A simple tea brewed before sleep. These acts were less about belief and more about comfort. To do what others had done before was reassuring. It placed a person inside a long, unbroken line of living. It said, "This has worked before. It may work again." There was humility in that, no attempt to conquer the unknown. Only a willingness to coexist with it. At night, these small practices took on greater meaning. When the mind loosened its grip, familiar scents and textures grounded the body. The bitterness of dried leaves, the roughness of twine, the warmth of a cup held in both hands. These sensations were anchors. They reminded people that they were still here, still breathing, still part of something larger than their worries. Faith, too, lived quietly in these moments, not as doctrine or declaration, but as presence, as habit, as rhythm. Prayers murmured without urgency. Words repeated not for their meaning, but for their familiarity. Even silence could be a form of faith. To sit in the dark and trust that morning would return required no explanation. It was simply known. In the shared spaces of medieval homes, these beliefs blended seamlessly with daily life. There was no sharp division between the sacred and the ordinary. Everything belonged, everything mattered in small ways. The night was especially generous in this regard. It softened certainty. It allowed doubt to rest. It invited surrender, not to fear, but to continuity. As you follow this gentle flow, you may notice how little resistance your own thoughts offer now. The story does not push. It does not ask you to remember facts or hold on to details. It moves like the seasons themselves, predictable, calming, cyclical. In this rhythm, even uncertainty feels less threatening. The medieval people did not need to resolve every question. Many things remained unanswered, and yet life continued. Crops grew. Children were born. Nights returned again and again, offering the same quiet mercy. That repetition mattered. Repetition tells the nervous system that it is safe, that nothing unexpected is required, that rest is allowed. Perhaps this is why these stories still reach us so deeply. They carry the memory of a slower pace, of nights that ask nothing more than presence. They remind us that humanity has always searched for balance, not through mastery, but through acceptance. The candle flickers, then steadies again. Its light reflects off the stone walls, now warm and familiar. The room feels smaller, cozier. The outside world recedes even further, becoming an idea rather than a place. This is the heart of the night, where thinking gives way to sensing, where history becomes atmosphere, where time loses its edges. Soon, we will turn toward the quiet paradoxes of medieval life, the ways society balanced restraint with compassion, order with understanding. We will notice how even contradictions softened at night, losing their sharpness. But there is no hurry to go there yet. Let this moment linger. Let the idea of seasons passing without effort soothe you. Let the image of simple rituals, repeated gently, settle into your mind like a familiar melody. You are allowed to rest within this rhythm. You do not need to carry anything forward. The night will remember for you. By now, the night has settled fully into itself. The air feels thicker, slower, as though even movement has learned to be careful not to disturb the quiet. The candle burns low, its flame steady and modest, no longer flickering with uncertainty. It has found its rhythm, a small, dependable presence in the dark. In this deep hour, contradictions soften. The medieval world was shaped by order, by laws, customs, and expectations that defined how life should unfold. Yet alongside this structure existed something gentler, less visible, but just as real: mercy. It lived not in proclamations, but in practice. Rules existed, certainly. They gave form to daily life. They offered predictability in a world where so much was uncertain. But within those rules, people found ways to breathe, to adapt, to allow space for human fragility. Order and mercy were not enemies. They were companions, walking quietly beside one another. During the day, order was visible. It rang in bells, stood tall in stone buildings, echoed in routines repeated without question. At night, mercy emerged. It filled the gaps. It softened edges. It allowed people to lay down the weight of expectation, even if only for a few hours. This balance was not spoken aloud. It was felt. Imagine again the shared room, now darker than before. The outlines of furniture blur. Details dissolve into shadow. What remains is presence, the quiet awareness of being alive, here, now. In these moments, judgment fades. The night does not ask who you were during the day. It does not measure your adherence to rules or your success in meeting expectations. It only holds you. Medieval people understood this instinctively. Night was a boundary the world respected. Even authority rested. Even vigilance slept. And in that pause, humanity found room to exist without scrutiny. This is where tenderness lived. Not in grand gestures or declarations, but in small allowances. In the decision to look away, in the choice to remain silent, in the shared understanding that some things did not need to be named. The candle's light now barely reaches the ceiling. Shadows gather above, gentle and unthreatening. The room feels enclosed, protective, like a nest built of stone and habit. Outside, the town is entirely still. The streets that once carried voices and footsteps now hold only memory. Windows are dark. Doors are closed. Even the cathedral seems to have exhaled, releasing the day's concerns into the night air. In this stillness, reflection becomes effortless. Not analytical reflection. Not problem-solving, but a soft awareness of self, of time, of continuity. People of this era lived with constant reminders of impermanence. Life was fragile. Loss was familiar. And yet, they found ways to continue, not through denial, but through acceptance. The night helped with that. It reminded them again and again that endings were not always final. Darkness did not mean disappearance. It meant rest. This understanding shaped how people treated one another. Compassion did not always take the form of forgiveness. Sometimes it was simply patience. Sometimes it was the decision not to press, not to question, not to demand clarity. Silence, when chosen kindly, can be an act of mercy. As you rest within this story, notice how your own inner dialogue may be growing quieter. Thoughts drift by without attachment. Feelings arise and pass without explanation. This is the same mental landscape medieval nights created. A space where nothing needed to be resolved before sleep. The structures of the world would return in the morning. Bells would ring. Duties would call. But for now there was a pause, generous, unconditional. This pause mattered. It allowed people to remain human within systems that could otherwise feel overwhelming. It offered relief without rebellion, rest without resistance. In many ways, it was a quiet form of wisdom. The candle's flame dims further, but does not go out. It seems content to exist as it is, without striving to illuminate more than necessary. This is the tone of the night now, enough without excess. Soon, we will gently explore how society itself made small accommodations for human need, how even rigid structures learned, over time, to bend just enough to prevent breaking. But there is no need to anticipate that yet. Let the idea of mercy without announcement settle in your mind. Let it remind you that not everything must be earned. Some comforts are simply available, waiting quietly. You are allowed to rest here. You are allowed to be unfinished. The night holds you without question. The night has reached its most generous hour. This is the time when even memory seems to soften, when the edges of thought blur gently, and the mind no longer insists on clarity. The candle is nearly spent now, its flame small but faithful, casting a low glow that barely moves. In this hour, the medieval city reveals something unexpected. Beneath its rules and rituals, beneath its careful structures and spoken expectations, there was a quiet understanding, a recognition that life, in all its complexity, could not be contained entirely. So the city made room, not loudly, not proudly, but practically. Life was dense here. People lived close together, shared walls, shared air, shared silence. The city learned over time that survival required not only order but accommodation. When human needs pressed too strongly against the boundaries of rule, small openings appeared. They were rarely discussed, rarely celebrated. But they existed. Streets curved not just for defense, but for flow. Markets opened and closed with predictable rhythm. Spaces emerged where people could step out of view, out of scrutiny, if only briefly. These were not places of indulgence. They were places of release, quiet acknowledgments that life required balance. The medieval city understood something that modern life often forgets. Pressure, if unrelieved, breaks what it contains. So instead of forcing perfection, it allowed imperfection to settle gently at the edges. At night, this understanding was clearest. Daylight sharpened distinctions. Night blurred them. Under darkness, roles softened. The laborer and the merchant rested the same way. The learned and the illiterate shared the same silence. The city, stripped of its visible hierarchy, became simply a collection of breathing bodies under the same sky. Even authority rested, torches dimmed, doors closed. The watch moved slowly, quietly, more guardians than enforcers. Their presence was steady, not aggressive, a reassurance rather than a threat. This calm enforcement of safety mattered. It allowed people to sleep without fear. It let the city breathe. Within these hours, quiet negotiations occurred, not in words, but in shared understanding. What was overlooked? What was tolerated? What was gently redirected rather than punished? Mercy lived here too. Not as forgiveness spoken aloud, but as flexibility, as restraint, as the choice not to act when action would disturb the balance. This kind of mercy leaves no records. It does not announce itself, but it shapes lives profoundly. Imagine lying in a small room, aware of the city around you, its walls, its streets, its sleeping inhabitants. The knowledge that you are part of something larger can be comforting, especially when that larger thing does not demand anything of you in return. The medieval city, at night, asked nothing. It did not require productivity. It did not demand identity. It did not insist on adherence. It simply existed, holding everyone equally within its boundaries. This holding is what allows sleep to come. When the mind senses safety, not perfection, not control, but safety, it releases its vigilance. Thoughts slow, muscles relax, awareness drifts inward. The city knew this instinctively. That is why nights were protected so carefully. That is why bells marked time not to interrupt rest, but to frame it. That is why routines existed, not to constrain, but to reassure. Predictability is a form of kindness. As you rest within this story, notice how the idea of a city making room feels. A place that does not judge every movement, that allows space for quiet human need, that understands balance as survival. This is not a story of indulgence. It is a story of endurance. Humanity persists not by denying its nature, but by learning how to live with it gently. The medieval city learned this lesson slowly, imperfectly, but sincerely. Its structures bent just enough to keep from breaking. Its nights offered refuge without spectacle. And perhaps that is why these images remain soothing. They speak to a deep longing for systems that support rather than press, for order that holds without tightening. The candle's flame is now very small. It casts a final steady light, as if aware that its task is nearly complete. Soon it will fade, not abruptly, but naturally. This is how the night works too. It does not end with announcement. It dissolves into sleep, carrying stories with it, releasing details that are no longer needed. Before that happens, allow yourself to rest in this idea a little longer, that even in structured worlds, kindness finds quiet ways to exist, that even under rules, humanity breathes. That rest is not rebellion, it is restoration. The city sleeps. The candle waits. And the story continues, gently, toward release. The candle has nearly reached its end. Its flame is small now, a quiet point of light that seems less concerned with illuminating the room than with simply existing. Shadows have softened into one another. The walls no longer feel separate from the darkness. Everything blends, gently, without resistance. This is the hour when the body remembers. Not in stories or images, but in sensations, in weight, in warmth, in the steady rhythm of breath rising and falling without instruction. Long before words formed thoughts, the body learned how to rest. It learned how to release tension once safety was felt. It learned how to sink into stillness when the world grew quiet enough. Medieval knights honored this ancient knowledge. There were no screams, no constant signals calling for attention. Darkness was complete and silence was deep. The body responded naturally, slipping into a slower rhythm that matched the night itself. People did not think of sleep as something to achieve. It was something that arrived. And when it came, it carried the weight of the day away with it. The body, even then, held memory. Not of events, but of patterns. It remembered how many nights had ended this way, lying still, wrapped in familiar textures, surrounded by quiet. It remembered that nothing bad usually happened when the lights went out. This memory mattered. It allowed vigilance to soften. It allowed muscles to loosen. It allowed breath to deepen without conscious effort. Even concern, that quiet companion of waking hours, grew tired and lay down. In the medieval world, the body was trusted to know its own limits. Exhaustion was physical, honest. Rest followed naturally. There was no need to negotiate with the mind. Night did the work. As you rest within this story, your body may recognize this rhythm too. A subtle sense of familiarity may arise, not from memory, but from instinct. The body has done this before. Across centuries, across lives, across countless nights, it has learned how to let go when the world grows still. The room we have been visiting is now almost entirely dark. The candle's flame flickers faintly, its light barely distinguishable from the surrounding shadows. The air feels heavier, not with weight, but with quiet. In this darkness, distinctions fade. Past and present blur. Story and listener soften. Thought and sensation drift closer together. This is not confusion. It is integration. The medieval people did not analyze this state. They lived it. They trusted it. They allowed the body to take over when words were no longer useful. Perhaps this is why these stories, told softly, can still guide us there. They bypass explanation. They move directly to sensation. They remind the body of something it already knows. You may notice that thoughts arrive more slowly now, if at all. That images are less defined. That awareness feels broader, less focused. This is the body preparing to sleep. And it does so without urgency, without demand. Just as it always has. The candle finally dims further, its flame shrinking until it is no more than a glow. Wax has pooled at its base, solidifying quietly. Nothing is wasted. Everything completes its cycle. Outside, the city remains asleep. Walls stand. Streets wait. The sky holds steady, its stars unchanged by human concern. This stability matters. It tells the body that it does not need to stay alert. That it can rest without fear of missing something important. The medieval world, for all its uncertainty, offered this consistency at night. Darkness came. Darkness stayed. Morning would follow. There was comfort in that predictability. As you rest here, let the story loosen its hold. You do not need to follow every sentence. You do not need to remember what came before. The body does not require narrative to rest. It requires safety. It requires quiet, and those have already been provided. Soon, we will allow the story itself to fade, just as the candle does. We will release even these gentle images, leaving only the calm they created. But not yet. For a moment longer, remain aware of your breath. Not controlling it, simply noticing its natural rhythm. In and out, slow, even. This rhythm is older than history. It belongs to every human who has ever rested beneath a dark sky. You are part of that continuity now. The night knows how to carry you the rest of the way. The candle has gone out, not with drama. Not with sound, just a gentle surrender to darkness. The room no longer has edges. Stone walls dissolve into shadow. the ceiling disappears. What remains is space, quiet, unmeasured, and kind. This is the moment medieval nights were built for, when nothing more is asked of the body or the mind. Darkness is complete now. And in that completeness, there is relief. For centuries, people trusted this moment. They did not fear it. They did not fill it with activity or distraction. They allowed themselves to be carried by it, confident that morning would return without their supervision. This trust was learned slowly, night after night. The body remembers it still. As the story softens further, it no longer needs to describe places or objects. The medieval town, the stone room, the city walls, all of these can fade now. They have done their work. They have guided you here. What remains is sensation. The feeling of weight supported. The awareness of warmth. The steady rhythm of breath continuing on its own. In the medieval world, sleep was not a performance. There were no expectations attached to it. One did not fail at resting. Sleep arrived when it arrived, and until then, the body simply rested in stillness. This gentleness matters. It removes pressure. It dissolves effort. And without effort, rest deepens naturally. You may notice that your thoughts are less formed now. They drift rather than arrive. They do not insist on attention. This is not something you are doing. It is something happening to you quietly. The night knows how to guide this process. Outside, though unseen, the city continues to hold its shape. Walls stand firm. Streets remain where they have always been. Nothing shifts suddenly. Nothing intrudes. This steadiness allows the mind to let go completely. In medieval times, people often experienced sleep in layers. A first deep rest, a quiet waking, then sleep again. There was no anxiety about this rhythm. It was understood as natural, humane. Rest did not need to be perfect to be restorative. Even now, this understanding can soothe us. There is no wrong way to rest. There is no wrong pace. The body knows what it needs. As you drift further, the story becomes less linear. It no longer moves forward. It simply settles like dust in still air. Words grow fewer. Images soften. Silence stretches. This is not an ending, it is a return. A return to the simplest state of being, breathing, warm, supported, unobserved. The medieval night offered this sanctuary every evening, regardless of circumstance. Wealth and poverty mattered less here. Success and failure lost meaning. Everyone returned to the same darkness, the same quiet. This equality of rest was one of the night's greatest gifts. No one needed to earn it. As you rest within this final stretch, you may feel the boundary between listening and sleeping grow thin. That is exactly as it should be. You do not need to hold on to the story. You do not need to remember it. Let it pass through you, leaving only calm behind. Soon, there will be nothing left to follow. Just breath. Just stillness. And the gentle knowledge that you are safe enough to let go. The night has done its work. The story no longer moves forward. It settles. Like water finding stillness after a long journey, everything arrives gently at rest. There is no candle now. No room. No city to imagine. Only the sensation of night, wide, quiet, and unbroken. This is where medieval nights always led, when all structures dissolved into something simpler and older than history itself. A place where the body was no longer observed, corrected, or shaped by expectation, a place where being was enough. In this darkness, there is no past to remember and no future to anticipate. Time loosens its grip. Moments stretch without direction, without weight. Breath moves slowly. The body rests heavily. Thoughts drift like clouds too thin to hold shape. Long ago, people trusted this space. They did not analyze it. They did not fear it. They entered it the way one steps into a familiar river, knowing it would carry them without effort. The medieval night did not promise answers. It offered something better. Release. Release from rules. Release from vigilance. Release from the need to understand oneself completely. And in that release, healing happened quietly. Muscles softened. Minds unclenched. The heart slowed to a rhythm older than worry. This was not a dramatic transformation. It was not a revelation. It was a return to the simplest form of safety a human being can feel. Held, unseen, allowed to rest. Across centuries, across countless nights, this experience repeated itself with gentle consistency. Different names, different beliefs, different structures during the day. But at night, the same surrender. Darkness gathered everyone equally. The farmer, the merchant, the scholar, the watchman, all returned to the same quiet. That is the truth history rarely tells loudly. That beneath every system, every rule, every era, there has always been this shared human need to be free from attention for a while, to be nothing more than a breathing body in the dark. If you have followed this story to this moment, your body may already be there. Perhaps your awareness feels distant. Perhaps words arrive slowly, or not at all. Perhaps the line between listening and sleeping has softened beyond recognition. That is not something you need to correct. It is the destination. A medieval night does not ask you to stay awake to honor it. It asks you to let go, to trust the body's memory, to trust the rhythm of rest, to trust that nothing essential will be lost if you sleep now. If tonight's story reminded you of a beautiful memory, a quiet room, a familiar night, a time when the world felt slower, you may share it when you wake. There is no hurry. Memories are patient. When was the last time you looked up at the night sky and felt at peace? You do not need to answer now. The question can rest beside you, unanswered, gentle. Here, no one rests alone. Every story is a soft lantern in the dark. And even lanterns are allowed to go out. If this story brought you calm, leave a gentle comment for yourself. A small marker of rest, waiting quietly for morning. And if you wish to return another night, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys with tedious history for sleep. For now, let the story fade completely. No images, no words, no effort, just night. Just rest. Just the slow, unbroken silence that has carried human beings into sleep for as long as there have been stars above and darkness enough to hold us. Good night.